They told everyone I was the disappointment, the dropout, the one who never lived up. My parents made sure the story stuck like a stain. Even at Christmas dinners I wasn't invited to. But that night, when my phone buzzed with an invitation titled Family Dinner, Casual Catch-Up, I just stared at it for a long time. Why now? What did they want after 5 years of silence? The words felt sharp, almost mocking. But something in me wanted to see their faces again, to see if I still cared. I showed up in the same gray shirt they once called cheap-looking. My father greeted me like a stranger. My mother smiled too wide, her eyes flickering between pity and guilt. And just as the tension thickened, a knock came at the door. My portfolio manager, Daniel Cho, stepped inside, calm as the ocean. The room froze. My father's wine glass stopped midair. My mother's smile fell. What kind of parents mock their son, only to dine with the man managing his fortune? Dinner starts with the sound of knives touching porcelain, the kind of silence that tries too hard to be polite. My mother keeps asking about my projects, her voice stretching each word like it's made of glass. My father talks over me, bragging about Rachel's promotion, how she's the pride of the family. I nod, pretending not to notice the small cuts beneath their smiles. Rachel barely eats, her eyes flicking toward me every few seconds like she's trying to measure something she can't name. I tell them I've been working with investments, but my father laughs, saying, playing the stock market again? I smile. Something like that. The irony hangs in the air so thick it almost hums. They don't know that the man who will soon walk through that door manages more wealth for me than my father ever built in his lifetime. My father leans back, proud and loud, telling some story about how he taught us the value of hard work. I remember the nights I came home from my warehouse job, hands raw, and how he called it a phase. My mother nods, eyes full of rehearsed pride, while Rachel twirls her wine glass, pretending not to exist. I can feel the heat rising in my chest, the kind that comes before saying something you'll regret. But I don't speak. I've learned that silence cuts deeper than words when the right truth is waiting behind it. I just smile, watching their comfort sit on borrowed time. Rachel finally breaks the rhythm. She asks quietly, "So, what exactly do you do now?" The table falls silent. I take a sip of water, watching the condensation trail down my fingers. "I manage assets," I say simply. My mother laughs, sharp, dismissive. "Whose assets, dear?" Her tone makes the whole room smirk. I almost want to tell her about the tech company I invested in before it went public, about the foundation I've quietly funded in her name. But I don't. I just look at her, hold her gaze, and smile in a way that makes her uncomfortable. "You'll see soon," I say softly. She blinks, unsure if she should be insulted or afraid. The conversation fades into shallow talk about vacations and cars, but everyone's pretending now. My father checks his watch twice, restless. My mother refills her wine again. Rachel seems lost in thought, staring at the untouched steak on her plate. I know the storm is coming. The sound of polished shoes down the hall, the door opening, the hush that follows. My father clears his throat. "We're glad you came, son," he says, tone dry and formal. I nod. I'm glad too. And then, as if on cue, the front door clicks open again. The butler announces, "Mr. Daniel Cho." The silence is instant. Their faces turn. I don't look up. I already know what they'll see. The man who knows exactly how much I'm worth has just walked into the room where I was once told I'd be nothing. It started with a single word: failure. My father said it like a verdict. I was 20 then, standing in our kitchen with a duffel bag full of clothes and a heart that had already cracked weeks before. I'd dropped out of college, too broke to keep pretending. My mother stood behind him, silent but complicit, her lips tight with shame. You'll come crawling back, he said. People like you always do. I remember looking at Rachel. She couldn't meet my eyes. Maybe she believed him. Maybe she was afraid I'd prove him wrong. I walked out that night with $37 and a notebook full of ideas. I didn't know if I'd make it. I just knew I couldn't stay where love had terms and pride had a price tag. I slept in my car that night behind an empty gas station. The rain hit the windshield like it was trying to erase me. I remember writing in that notebook, "Make something from nothing." The ink smudged with every drop that fell from my hair. It wasn't courage, not really. It was anger dressed as hope. I promised myself I wouldn't just survive. I'd thrive so quietly that when they heard my name again, it'd be through someone else's lips, not mine. The first months were a blur of rejection and cheap coffee. I worked at a warehouse by day and studied markets by night, watching numbers move like music I wanted to understand. The world didn't notice me, and that was perfect. I learned quietly, saved every cent, failed more times than I could count. Each failure hardened me. Each small win felt like oxygen. There were nights I thought about calling home, but pride is its own kind of hunger. It keeps you alive when love won't. One night at the library, I met Daniel. He was older, calm, reading a book on behavioral finance while everyone else crammed for exams. We talked about markets like they were stories about people, not money. He saw something in the way I thought, asked if I'd ever considered managing portfolios. I laughed, told him I couldn't even afford rent. He just smiled and said, "That's temporary." It was the first time in years someone spoke to me like I wasn't a mistake waiting to happen. Years passed in silence. My parents never called, and I never sent a message. Every milestone felt like a secret victory. The first big investment, the first 6 figures. The moment Daniel said, "You did it." But the truth, I didn't feel proud. I felt empty. Because no matter how high you climb, part of you still aches for the people who let go. When Daniel suggested attending a few family events for networking, I laughed. "Not that family," I said. But when the dinner invitation came years later, I didn't delete it. Maybe it wasn't revenge I wanted. Maybe it was closure. Success doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in quietly, disguised as persistence. I remember the first time my trades turned real profit. It wasn't a celebration. It was disbelief. I kept refreshing the numbers, certain it was a glitch. Daniel stood behind me, calm as always, saying, "Now it begins." I didn't buy new things or post anything online. I just paid off the last of my debts, cooked dinner, and slept for 12 hours straight. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't need anyone to clap for me. The world had mocked me in silence. I learned to win in silence too. Over the years, small wins became patterns. Patterns became intuition. I learned to see opportunity where others saw noise. Daniel and I built slowly, never gambling, never rushing. I lived below my means, still walking to the grocery store, still wearing the same jacket I left home in. My parents were throwing fundraisers, flaunting pictures with people they couldn't afford to impress. Meanwhile, I was buying property under silent companies, funding startups I believed in. I didn't need them to see it. But deep down, I knew one day they would. Success changed Daniel and me in different ways. He started getting calls from high-end clients, dinners with investors, people who once ignored him. I stayed in the shadows, letting him handle the spotlight. I wasn't hiding. I was building. There's power in being underestimated. Every time someone called me lucky, I thought of my father's voice saying failure. Every time I signed another contract, I whispered that word under my breath and smiled. Maybe failure was just another word for unfinished. Rachel found me first by accident. I saw her across a lobby one afternoon as I was leaving a meeting. She was dressed sharp, as always, but her eyes looked tired, like something inside her had broken quietly. She hesitated before walking over. "Ethan?" she said, voice unsure, like saying my name might summon ghosts. We talked awkwardly for a few minutes. She asked what I did. I said, "Finance." She smiled the same way our mother used to, too bright, too strained. Then she whispered, "They still talk about you, you know." I nodded, already walking away. "I know," I said. That night, I looked through the window of my apartment at the city lights and thought about home. It wasn't revenge I wanted anymore. It was peace. I'd spent years chasing success to prove something, but I realized the win wasn't theirs to see. It was mine to live. Still, a part of me waited for the moment when fate would fold everything back together, when the past and present would collide in a single room. I didn't know then that the invitation on my phone would be the spark, that the dinner would turn my silence into revelation. Rachel's world looked perfect from the outside. Corner office, diamond ring, polished heels, clicking on marble floors. But perfection cracks quietly. It started with one client pulling out, then another. Whispers in the firm about a bad deal. Her fiancé, Michael, stopped answering her late-night calls. I wasn't there, but I can imagine her holding it together the way she always did. Back straight, voice steady, heart breaking in silence. Somewhere between ambition and exhaustion, she began to see herself in me. The one who fell. The one she once mocked for trying. She went home that night to find Michael's side of the closet empty. A note sat on the dresser. Short, final, cruel. The kind that doesn't need signatures. She didn't cry, not right away. She poured herself wine, stared at her own reflection in the mirror, and realized she looked like our mother, smiling while falling apart. She called out our parents, but even they sounded more concerned about what the neighbors might think. That was the night Rachel stopped pretending she was different from the family that raised her. Days blurred together. She threw herself into work, chasing deadlines that didn't matter. Then one afternoon, while scrolling through news on her phone, she froze. A headline. Young investors silent. Fund crosses $50 million. The photo showed Daniel Cho shaking hands at a conference. She knew that name. She zoomed in on the second man beside him, slightly out of focus. Me. Her hand trembled. I wasn't just doing fine. I had become everything they said I'd never be. She whispered my name under her breath, like a prayer she'd once forgotten how to say. Rachel tried to tell our parents. She showed them the article, her voice shaking. My mother glanced at the photo, unimpressed. Anyone can look successful online, she said. My father didn't even look up from his paper. He's probably working for that man, he muttered. Rachel felt something snap inside her. All the years of pretending, of measuring herself by their pride, collapsed in one quiet breath. She finally saw what I saw the night I left, that our parents' love had always been conditional, and that their approval wasn't a prize. It was a leash. That night, Rachel drove to my apartment. She parked outside, but never came in. She sat there for nearly an hour, watching the lights in my window, maybe trying to find the words she never said. She didn't know I was standing on the balcony above, watching her car through the rain. I could have gone down. I could have ended the distance right there. But some wounds need time, not words. I watched her drive away, taillights vanishing into the dark, and whispered softly, "It's okay, Rachel. You'll see soon." The first call came from my mother. I almost didn't answer. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered, shaky around the edges. "Ethan, your father's business. Things have been difficult." Difficult. That word again. I could almost hear the echo of pride still trapped between her sentences. She didn't apologize. She never would. Instead, she said they'd love to see me for dinner, just to catch up. I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because sometimes you have to walk back into the fire to see if it still burns. Behind their invitation was desperation. My father's company was sinking. bad loans, over-leveraged projects, and the kind of silence banks give before they take everything. I learned all this from Daniel long before the call. "They'll come to you soon," he'd said. I remember laughing bitterly. "For help or forgiveness? Both," he replied. I wasn't sure which would hurt more. The thought of them needing me felt strange, like justice and sadness sharing the same seat. Meanwhile, Rachel was the only one brave enough to say the truth. She called me a week later, voice trembling. "They're not okay, Ethan. Dad's losing everything." I didn't gloat. I didn't ask why they deserve saving. I just listened. Then she whispered, "They're scared of you." That line stuck with me. Scared of me? The boy they threw away? Maybe they should be. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they finally had to face the weight of what they'd done. Daniel tried to talk me out of going to the dinner. "You don't owe them anything," he said. Maybe he was right, but I wasn't going for them. I was going for the boy who left home with $37 and a notebook, the one who needed to see it come full circle. "If this is closure," I said, "then let's make it clean." Daniel nodded. "Then I'll be there too." I didn't argue. I knew his presence would say everything I didn't need to. The night before the dinner, I sat alone in my living room, going through old photos I'd once buried deep in a drawer. Rachel's graduation, my parents' smiles before they turned cold, the house that never felt like home. I realized then that this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about showing myself that I had survived. I looked at one last photo. At 16, standing beside my father, eyes hopeful, unbroken, and whispered, "We made it." The house looked exactly the same, but smaller somehow. Maybe time does that, shrinks things you once feared. I walked through the door to the smell of roasted lamb and old pride. My mother greeted me first, her voice sweet but trembling. My father stood by the table pretending to check his watch. Rachel smiled faintly, relief and guilt tangled in her eyes. The table was perfect, silver polished, candles lit, not a single thing out of place. But the silence between us was heavy enough to crack glass. "It's good to have you home," my mother said. I smiled, though it wasn't home anymore. It was just a place where I used to beg to be seen. Dinner began like a performance they'd rehearsed for weeks. My mother spoke about the new garden renovation as if money wasn't vanishing by the day. My father asked about my little projects, his tone caught between curiosity and condescension. I answered politely, every word measured. Rachel kept trying to redirect the conversation, but they wouldn't stop circling me like critics around an unfinished painting. Then my father smirked and said, "So, what's it like working under someone successful?" Rachel froze. My mother laughed softly. I leaned back and simply said, "You'll see." My mother reached for the wine, maybe to numb the awkwardness. She started reminiscing about how hard it was to raise a rebellious son. Every word felt rehearsed, practiced for sympathy. I let her finish. Then I asked quietly, "Did it ever occur to you that maybe I wasn't lost? Maybe you just didn't understand where I was going?" Her hand froze midair, glass trembling. My father's eyes narrowed. "Success doesn't erase failure," he said coldly. "No," I replied, "but failure can build success if you let it." That was the moment something shifted in the room. The laughter died. Even the candles seemed to burn lower. Then the doorbell rang. My father frowned. "Who's that?" he muttered. The butler stepped away, and seconds later, Daniel Cho walked in, perfectly composed, portfolio in hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said politely. "Thank you for hosting dinner." My father blinked, confused. My mother's smile collapsed. Daniel placed the portfolio beside my plate, his tone professional. "Ethan, I brought the updated reports you requested." The silence that followed was deafening. My father looked from Daniel to me, realization creeping like cold water up his spine. You work for him, he whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. No, sir. I work with him. No one spoke for a long moment. My father's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. My mother's hand clutched her necklace like it could save her. Rachel exhaled softly, eyes glistening. I stood slowly and looked around the room that had once made me feel so small. You told everyone I was a failure, I said quietly. But I guess failure learned how to invest. My father didn't reply. He just stared, pale, broken, lost for words. I turned to Daniel. We're done here. As I walked toward the door, I could feel their stares following me. Not with anger, but disbelief. Sometimes victory doesn't roar. Sometimes it just walks out quietly, leaving echoes behind. I didn't look back when I stepped outside. The air was cold, but it felt clean. For years, I thought revenge would feel like victory, but it didn't. It just felt quiet. Daniel walked beside me without saying a word. The Mercer house behind us glowed like a dying ember, its light still beautiful but losing heat. He asked softly, "You okay?" I nodded. Yeah, for the first time, I think I am. I looked up at the night sky, realizing how much time I'd lost trying to prove something to people who'd stopped listening long ago. Maybe this was it. Not revenge. Just release. Rachel came to see me a week later. She didn't knock this time, just waited by the cafe where I like to work. When I saw her, she looked smaller, not weaker, just human again. We talked for hours, about the past, about the weight of pride, about how sorry she was. She cried halfway through, and I let her. They don't know how to say sorry, she said. I know, I replied. They never did. She asked if I hated them. I thought about it, then shook my head. No, I just stopped needing them. That night, I visited the old house one last time. The lights were dim, the yard unkempt. The once perfect garden wilted. My mother opened the door halfway, surprise flickering in her tired eyes. My father stood behind her, silent. I didn't go in. I just said, I forgive you. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was calm, steady, real. They didn't answer. My mother just nodded. Tears welling but not falling. That was enough. I turned away before they could say anything else, before words ruined what silence had already healed. Months later, I opened a new fund. A youth foundation under my parents' names. No one knew it was me. The press called it the Mercer Initiative. I smiled when I read the headlines. They'd never know I'd turned their name into something that finally helped someone. Daniel laughed when I told him. You're still too soft, he said. Maybe he was right. But some legacies aren't built from pride. They're rebuilt from pain. I sometimes drive past their house. The lights are dimmer now. The laughter quieter. But I don't feel anger anymore. Just peace. The world's strange like that. Sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who teach you how to rebuild. I'm not the boy they called a failure anymore, but I'm not the man seeking revenge either. I'm just someone who finally understands that the truest kind of success isn't proving them wrong. It's not needing to anymore.